Hey everybody, welcome to Pulumi Q&A, and today we're deep diving into the world of infrastructure as code. I mean, sort of as always. And I'm thrilled to have here today Matt Stephenson. And if you haven't heard the news, Pulumi has just announced the general availability of the Java SDK, joining our existing support for TypeScript, Python, Go, C Sharp. But this is huge for Java developers who want to manage cloud infrastructure using their preferred language. So, Matt, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us why you care and why Java is important to you?
Yeah, I'm Matt Stephenson. I'm a software engineer. I work very closely with the Trino Software Foundation, and Java is the primary language that we use there. So I think that having Java support for Pulumi makes it very easy for us to do a lot of testing and a lot of verification of Trino builds. And I think that some of the various managed service providers can take advantage of Pulumi Java as well for building out their own managed services. So it's made things a lot smoother in adoption. Some of my examples that I've done at past conferences for Trino have used like the Go SDK and things like that because of the availability of Java's SDK. So now I think it'll be great to be able to do all of that in Java going forward.
Yeah, and what were the challenges when you weren't in your native language? So if you were doing things, maybe I mean sometimes not even in code, right? Sometimes people are doing more configuration.
Yeah, I think that the common thing is that just creates like a barrier between people who normally do Java development, on on Trino itself, or, if the rest of your ecosystem is Java services, you've got a lot of software engineering talent there that is focused on building the services, but then there's this, impedance mismatch between what they're doing on a daily basis and what your infrastructure team might be doing. So having Java be the common language between the two teams makes it so that you know your service teams, or in the case of Trino, like the actual core committers of Trino, feel much more comfortable approaching the infrastructure as code. So you can really delegate out and democratize a lot of the development of infrastructure to service teams.
Mm. And how does that work in practice? But also, like, what's Trino? And then when you are working on Trino, is the infrastructure code just like right there, along with the data processing or et cetera?
Yeah. The infrastructure as code is kind of, I think a lot of my sample repos are in separate repos, but I have experience with like having like a massive mono repo that included both all of the microservices and the infrastructure as code to deploy those microservices. And I think that, having all of that as a common language is really powerful. The migration, the kind of some of the big things that like being able to use Java helped us with was like being able to leverage talent within the organization to create strong abstractions in the Java code, much more sophisticated than like if we were in a different language that we're like don't have that strong a talent in. So like utilizing TypeScript, you know, I I witnessed where like the abstractions weren't very strong. There's a lot of like code being piped through. There was a lot of just like abstractions not being like very weak abstractions where like maps of stuff were just kind of passed through layers into the actual construction, the creation of, or the instantiation of Pulumi resources so that, you don't have like, you're not building like a really like crisp code base. I think it also is really powerful for being able to interoperate with the rest of your existing code. So you can do things like, if you've got like TypeScript and Java per se in the same repo, you might be building everything in Maven primarily, but then having to like shell out to TypeScript builds or NPM or whatnot to be able to do those to run that chunk of Pulumi code. Being able to run everything as a Maven build and then just have like the Maven execution plugin be able to just invoke Pulumi and instantiate the infrastructure is like incredibly powerful. Um,
Yeah, I think you said you were even like testing your infrastructure code or
yes,
something.
yeah. We do have JUnit tests now throughout the code base that test like that configuration is passed correctly. One of the interesting abstractions that you can add is like I actually saw where we removed the concept of like having even Helm charts in there because we had the ability to really leverage the Java framework that we were building on top of Airlift. And we were able to kind of like be able to construct those applications by hand a lot more easily in Pulumi code and built like we'd built a kind of a application deployment or application builder kind of
Mm,
chunk of code that allowed us to abstract away all of the concept of it running one of those microservices that's built on Airlift, but not have to maintain the Helm charts. And what that also does is it means that you remove a lot of these like intermediate layers of abstraction that may cause you to have meaningful defaults for configuration defined multiple times. Like you have one meaningful default defined within your framework, one meaningful default defined or like within your configuration class that's a part of your that's utilizing your framework. And then you have another meaningful default inside of the Go template section of the Helm chart. And then you have another meaningful default defined within the values.yaml. And then you have another meaningful default defined within Pulumi. So what that kind of allows you to do is squish that down, and then you just have those configuration values pushed through that application builder abstraction um, directly into the running applications configuration. So you don't have this like layers
yeah,
upon layers of configuration defaults.
amazing. I feel like
Yeah,
people become blind to that and they just accept it. And it's like Engan, who's on my team, like I think it's kind of crazy that Helm is a thing where we're templating a language that has white space. And then, but everybody's just like, well, yeah, but it gets the job done.
right.
But can't we live in a better world? I don't know. I have a whole rant about this, but I think it's too real. But do you have any other interesting examples? So is this, um, what kind of abstractions are you building up? Like one for a service or like what level
Yes.
are we talking about here?
So you got to think of it as it's like building out, like abstracting away the concept of building out, like say the entire Kubernetes cluster. So if you're running in multiple clouds, that makes it really easy. You could say like, I need a Kubernetes cloud, or I need a Kubernetes cluster. This is the cloud I'm in, and then it'll easily pick the correct implementation for that cloud to prescriptively create a Kubernetes cluster. However, like you might want that to look. So EKS, GKE, AKS, and then deploy on top of it like things that might be able to a lot of your common, auto scaling features and things like that. Like if you're on EKS, you might want to deploy Carpenter into it. If you're on AKS, you might need to put cluster autoscaler still. Um, Things like that. Abstracting away, say, the entire observability pipeline that you may have, like open telemetry collectors. Say you've got like Datadog in there somewhere. You've got to deploy some Datadog agents or Fluent bit or Fluent D, abstracting all of that away so that you can do that in a prescriptive way for every single Kubernetes cluster you're deploying. And then, on top of all that, like, of course, all of your services, right? So, like, you can follow the kind of pattern that I described where you have like this application builder. I think that that's really great. But of course, like, you know, I think Pulumi makes it easy for us to build things in a way that makes the right path easy and all paths possible, right? So it's always possible to deploy Helm charts. It's always possible to go and like do what you need to do to get around kind of like that application builder abstraction. But I think having that is incredibly powerful. Some other things that we're using, I haven't yet used the Java automation API, but definitely have used it in other languages. And I think that that's like a really powerful construct. I also like that, like the interoperability between the automation API and the remote automation API for like being able to use Pulumi deployments. So
Mm.
that's awesome. I'm looking forward to trying that out.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty new. That's just launched, but yeah, the automation API has been a big ask, I think,
Yeah.
especially for people in the Java world. Yeah, you mentioned Builder. I don't know if this is why you're referring to it, but people in Java love their patterns, and I think like the Builder pattern is
Yeah.
pretty common. Are you guys using that type of? How do you guys write your infrastructure code?
Yeah, I would say that a lot of it is using the builder pattern. So you're doing things like say, we're trying to create like as fluent of APIs as possible. Of course, the builder pattern's one of those, right? So you can easily say like create my Kubernetes cluster with cloud provider AWS, with like with node classes that look like this, with, you know, this type of like utilizing Nginx as your ingress
Mm.
controller, things like that. So like having that Fluent API that you can get in Java is super powerful.
Yeah, I think that's where I can start to really feel like, if you're a Java developer and all of a sudden you're able to do infrastructure in a way that feels like at home, I guess, like you can
Yeah.
explore it with just like putting a dot and seeing what's next. And it feels familiar. And I don't know, like it feels like at hand. Like all of a sudden it's not this thing that's like far away and that other guy knows it. It's like, oh, this is right here. I get this. Look at
Right.
this. I can click in on it. I can see.
I think that like that's actually like a really neat thing about Pulumi in the SDK is that it works. There's a lot of like different SDKs out there for Java, and with some of them, it's very difficult to get like good code completion to work in your IDE. You know, a notable one that I remember is always, I haven't used it in a while, so it might be a little bit rusty here, but gRPC always kind of requires a little bit of extra builds and just to generate all of like the protocol buffer stubs and things like that. You know, with Pulumi, it's just like all of the, because the SDK is so much of the SDK is in Java native, right? You still need to have the Pulumi CLI, but the way that the SDK interoperates with the Pulumi CLI means that like there's so much of that Java code is already present that code completion works really smoothly. So like it's a lot faster, I think, for me at least, to write Pulumi code in Java than it was when I have done it in the past in like say TypeScript, where getting that code completion, I don't know, maybe I'm just not as good at TypeScript, but the getting my IDE set up to really get good code completion is like always a little bit challenging. And I think with Java, it's like it's super simple. It might also be that like just having like the same language across the whole like the whole monorepo now just makes all of that a lot smoother.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a big part of it, right? Like TypeScript, people might feel the same way if they had to use the Java
Yeah,
API.
that's
Do you
true.
have the
That's true.
Yeah, like there's a lot to ramp up on, at least for me. Like, when you start doing really involved cloud infrastructure, it's nice when like the programming language isn't one of those.
Right.
Like you already have that kind of bridge into this land where the tooling feels familiar, and especially like for me, I love types and just being told like, oh, this shape doesn't fit here. Like that's super helpful.
Right.
Um,
Right. Having a strongly typed language is super valuable. And it's like really like the thing that originally got me to use Pulumi and promote it is that like it's internally, it's like you can't do most of what you need to do as a software engineer using something like HashiCorp config language with all of the interpolation and things like that. It doesn't allow you, it doesn't give you the same power as like TypeScript, Go, Java, or any other language bindings really support. I think that there's so much power in how you can leverage your existing libraries, your existing code as well. There's some code that I wrote at one point to do a bunch of like IPv6 cider math, right? And
mm.
that code is actually used both in some running services as well as in the middle of the Pulumi provisioning code. So it's like I can just reuse some of those libraries now that I spent like 30 minutes to an hour figuring out how this stuff works. I don't have to port it over to some other language. So that's fantastic.
I heard an interesting example with just resource naming. Some people care a lot about what their resources turn up as. And because they needed to have certain naming schemes in place, it became a little bit challenging to use Pulumi at first. But then the realization was like, oh, well, I can just write some functions that take in whatever I need and return the names and the exact shape that I need because it's just Python or it's just Java or, I know how to solve this problem because I know these tools. And so I can
Right.
it's just code. Yeah. I feel like that covers a lot of it. So the other thing that we haven't covered is just like what this open source project is. And then I'm also
Oh yeah.
curious just about Java and how you see it evolving. Like a lot of what you're talking about makes it sound like you might be interested in the newer features of Java, like, I don't know, records or
Oh yeah.
pattern matching. Like, how
Yeah.
does that all fit into an infrastructure future?
Oh yeah. I can tie those actually together. So, um, So Trino is a open source SQL query engine for big data analytics. It supports querying data at rest wherever it may exist. There's a large connector ecosystem that allows you to query things like MySQL or Postgres or BigQuery. And it also allows you to query large scale data lakes in, say, Iceberg, Hoodie, or Delta format. And it allows you to kind of bring these together and join these result sets together. So it has some interesting federation capabilities as well as just being an incredibly high performance query engine. It's all written in Java, and it all takes advantage of like the newest, latest, and greatest from the JDK. All of us who work on it, we're watching as new things are being added into the JVM. We're playing around with them as they're in preview mode and trying to see what's going to get adopted into the mainline for Java so that we can leverage those in Trino. And as a result, we're always staying on like basically the most current version of Java. We bump the JVM version in Trino like every single JDK release. That it means that we are sometimes a little bit ahead of the curve, and sometimes things break because of that. But it's okay. Um, in Pulumi Java, it's like incredibly powerful to be able to use some of the same concepts, like some of the newer streaming APIs or some of the newer, like being able to use records and things like that to simplify our lives. And, being able to just kind of take advantage of newer language features, like exhaustive, what is
Pattern
it?
match.
The exhaustive pattern matching. That's like really powerful, right? Because you can really, especially in something like infrastructure as code, because you can just define like an enum, and then you can have you can have your pattern matching statement and make sure you hit it all, right? And that's like, otherwise it's compilation error. I don't actually know like other. I don't know where. I think maybe Go has that as well, but like other languages that I've used, like that they don't generally have that as prevalent as Java does. I think I do recall it's in Scala, but of course,
Definitely in
another
Scala.
JVM
Yeah.
language. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that feature. Um, yeah, I agree, right? Embrace types and everything they can do to prevent you from making an error, especially when it has to do with your production infrastructure. Yeah. All right, so I think we covered everything. What do you think? Do we miss anything?
No, I think that hits it all.
That's awesome. Well, I'm excited for Java, the Java SDK release, for Java's continued evolution and just for everything you're building, Matt. So that wraps up our deep dive. If you are a Java person and you're looking to, do some infrastructure as code, check out the SDK, and do like Matt does and keep up with all the latest and greatest Java features. All right, thank you very much. Happy coding.